I'm Jordy Viney. I work for the city's planning office. I know some of you out there and don't know others. I've been working for the City of Newburyport for 25 years. Long time, and long enough that that I was here when the boardwalk first got rehabilitated 25 years ago. So, and maybe unfortunately for me, I've been here long enough now. I've got to do it all over again. But that's life. That's the way infrastructure works. So just quickly, the boardwalk, I would think probably everyone here agrees, it's a really important piece of infrastructure for the city. It's just a very central space for all of us. And it has clearly been in decline in the past few years. And the Newburyport Waterfront Trust, which owns and controls it, as well as the Department of Public Services of the city in terms of repairing it, just been falling behind in terms of trying to keep up with repairs as things have gotten worse. So when both the DPS and the Waterfront Trust came to us a little while ago and said, we can't keep up, and we actually don't really know how do we approach this, what do we do with this boardwalk? The step that we're in now, which is this sort of early part of the design phase, the planning phase, we got a community preservation grant and hired GEI marine engineering consultants, who was the firm that did the design of the bulkhead project recently. They're pretty familiar with this area. To do a feasibility study for us and to get in and really assess what the existing conditions are of all the different components of the boardwalk, and then give us a pretty rigorous alternatives analysis for how, and recommendations on how we should proceed with rehabilitating that. So that's what this main presentation by GEI is tonight. If you could hold your questions until after the presentation, it's about maybe 20 minutes or something like that, and then we can ask and answer as many questions and have as much of a discussion as we'd like. We have some physical samples of materials up here, which Dan will talk about, and which maybe at the end of the meeting, rather than everyone coming up and fingering, you can come up afterwards when we're done informally, and you can kind of get up a little more close to them. Up here tonight, we've got Dan Robbins and Brendan from GEI, our consultant, and we've got Matt from the Newburyport, the president, right, of the Newburyport Waterfront Trust, and Edith is in the audience too, the manager. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Dan. One more thing, we do have a microphone set up there. The acoustics in this place aren't fantastic, so when we get to the Q&A part, we can try passing around one of these, but if you want to just walk up to the standing one, that'll probably help with everyone else being able to hear. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jordy. Again, my name is Dan Robbins. I'm with GEI Consultants. We have been involved with the waterfront in Newburyport here for, gosh, probably going on a decade at this point, through the past couple of phases of the bulkhead rehabilitation efforts. And I'm really excited to be working with the city on the boardwalk feasibility assessment here. So to start off, I'm just going to go through a little bit of the background of the boardwalk itself. We'll then kind of step into a bit of what our tasking was within this feasibility assessment. Go through our three kind of tasks of evaluation of the alternatives, and then really step in to materials that we're assessing for some of that rehabilitation. And then we'll round it out with just a little bit more kind of forward thinking on the next steps, and then finally open it up for questions and comments. So with that. The boardwalk was originally constructed back in the 1970s. And that boardwalk was initially constructed with southern yellow pine. In 2001, a rehabilitation effort was completed for the boardwalk that reused the existing substructure. So basically anything other than the walking surface was generally reused. And at that time, the city replaced the timber decking with a 3x8 eBay decking, which is a tropical hardwood. Underneath the eBay, there are stringers that are pressure treated pine, and then there's concrete sonotubes or foundations that extend down into the soil, and that's what ultimately supports the boardwalk that we walk on. This past summer and fall, GEI has completed a assessment where we actually took up some of the boards to evaluate the boards kind of in their entirety, as well as look at the substructure, those stringers, the sonotubes, the concrete sonotubes, and other elements that are underneath the boardwalk. Generally, we found the material that is not exposed to the weather to be in pretty sound condition. So, you know, that was a really positive find there. But obviously, I think at least most of you have walked on the boardwalk. There's a lot of deteriorated deck that's out there. And with that, you know, we observed, you know, a number of rotten boards, a number of tripping hazards. Those are typically because of fasteners that extend down into the stringers that have failed. They either have gotten water down there to corrode the actual fastener itself, or the timber has failed in that, you know, immediate location. So those were the main items that we found. There's also, you know, some transitions between the hardscape that's around the edges of the boardwalk and the timber boardwalk itself that creates some elevation changes that are potential tripping hazards. And we also found some areas of the decking, particularly at the southern end of the embayment, that were really in pretty good condition, that don't require a lot of overall attention. So, you know, we tried to really kind of holistically look at the boardwalk itself, evaluate, you know, what its current condition was, and the areas that could potentially be reused, and areas that would be needing some future repair work. Our tasking of the feasibility study really included 3 alternative evaluations. The first being that we don't do anything other than what's being currently consistent out there. This would basically be, you know, periodic patching. The second alternative being, you know, improved maintenance, securing timber out there, refastening, being much more proactive in the approach. And then the final alternative being to partially reconstruct the boardwalk at the existing elevation. And each of those have, you know, different costs associated with them, as well as their overall service life and required, you know, maintenance on an annual basis. So alternative 1 of the no action patching really would just be going out there as currently exists, periodically patching. Some of that is replacing timber boards themselves, or using, you'll see some areas out there that have some like flexible pavement. It's kind of like a rubberized pavement. or, other alternatives. This really has long-term liability risk for the users out there. We're going to continue to have safety tripping hazards that are consistently popping up. But it is an option. It's the lowest cost option that is out there. Alternative two is improving that annual maintenance. So this would be going out there, selectively replacing boards that have rotted. If there's stringers that are needing repair, really kind of, working to replace those stringers, and then securing the fasteners and providing, annual kind of like fastener maintenance that would secure the boards down, eliminate some of those tripping hazards. This improves the safety, but it also requires, additional maintenance on an annual and ongoing basis. So, we say annual, that could be multiple times a year that the city or Waterfront Trust is out there having to, proactively make repairs. So, it increases a lot of demand and effort on their part. I will say that, as part of this feasibility study, Waterfront Trust and the city have gone out there and done a proactive maintenance repair recently this fall, securing, I believe they secured installed about 200 fasteners in the boardwalk, replaced and repaired some of the boards that are out there. And then actually within the next couple of weeks, there will be some additional timber that's getting installed. So, we're, as part of this effort, have identified some areas that needed repair, and there's an opportunity to be able to complete some of those repairs. And then the final kind of alternative that we've looked at is a partial reconstruction of the boardwalk. This really looks at our holistic approach of, what can be used out there. Some of the timber is in really good condition, and some of it is deteriorated. So, if we're able to reuse that timber, that provides some, cost savings as well as, increased sustainability efforts. So within this image here, the two areas that are in green were found to be in really pretty good condition. They would have minor repairs that are needed, but we don't, anticipate having to do a holistic removal and repair effort in those two areas. The areas that are in the yellow and red are areas that have quite a bit more widespread deterioration of the timbers and fasteners. And so we would look to remove all of these timbers within this area, and then selectively reharvest as much of that timber as possible. And our goal there is to really have about 1/3 of that material that we would be able to reuse, placed within that area that is colored yellow, so that you have one continuous area of this existing keypad decking. And then the two areas that are red would be replaced with the new timber boardwalk. We also looked at the elevations of the boardwalk as part of this, and we do note that the boardwalk during storm events may inundate from time to time. However, for the next 25 plus years, we don't anticipate that the boardwalk will overtop at any normal frequency. And so, as part of the recommendations here, is keep it at the existing elevation of the boardwalk as it is today. We've also evaluated the existing substructure And some of our recommendations are to potentially look, this would be evaluated further during the design phase, but at reducing the span. The spans between the stringers are really pretty wide. They're about 5 foot typical spacing. And that works for the relatively thick decking that we've got out there and the loads that we've got. But it's an unconventional framing for what is often used for decking structures. So, we looked at, the potential of reducing those spans, and this would add some additional construction time to the project on site, but would reduce the material cost of that decking. For instance, we could look at, instead of having a 3-inch thick deck, that deck might be 2 or even like 1¼ inches, which is a typical, thickness that you would see on most decks that you're familiar with. So there's some potential cost savings there, and really kind of evaluating, what those are. We also looked at, what the use is of the structure in this evaluation. So the boardwalk is not used for, vehicles. We've got a couple of, small maintenance vehicles that go out there, and it's mostly pedestrian. Movement that is on the boardwalk. So, next, we evaluated, different material choices for the boardwalk. Currently out there is Ipe, which is a tropical hardwood. Before that, the original construction was a southern yellow pine that was pressure treated. And both of those have lasted about 25 years. We were hoping to be able to get a little bit longer service life out of the tropical hardwood initially. And there is still some nice longevity, but it is starting to require additional maintenance. So the different materials that we've looked at are tropical hardwoods, softwoods. This would be like your southern yellow pine, composite decking, precast concrete, and a cast-in-place concrete where you'd actually raise the elevation and place the concrete on the surface. So we looked at all of those really through a number of conversations with the city and different stakeholders, have identified that the concrete options really don't fit the city's aesthetics and really needs for a boardwalk along this historic waterfront. So from there, we've evaluated them and really kind of moved on to the other top 3 choices. The tropical hardwoods, this would be an Ipe. This is actually a piece of Ipe that is out there as an option. Purple Heart, down at the end is a piece of Purple Heart. There's a connection part of the rail trail over by Cashman Park that is using the Purple Heart currently. So it's another option that we've got within the city here. These are both nice options in that they have long service life. They don't use any chemical treatments, but there are some challenges with them as well. They're expensive. They have sustainability concerns because most of the tropical hardwoods are coming from either Brazil or Guyana, or imports that if we've got any, we run short on material, they can have high lead times. There can be quality control issues with getting some of the material here as well. And so these would all have to be factored in to the overall construction. And the estimated cost for the tropical hardwoods would generally be about 1.8 million to replace the areas that are in red and yellow.
That's just material.
That construction costs. So that includes the overall construction of the boardwalk. So it's, reharvesting what we can that would go into that area within the yellow, and then the areas within the red would have new material of a tropical. We also looked at softwoods. These are less expensive, so there's a lower upfront cost to them. But it's also important to know that the upfront cost of the materials is only a portion of that cost, right? There's also cost for the labor and the equipment that really do add quite a bit to the overall cost. So there's not as much differential as you might think of materials there. The softwoods would have a shorter service life, generally on the order of about 15 to 20 years, versus the hardwoods are going to be on the 25 to 50 year time frame. So the other disadvantage is that they're going to have chemical treatments. Typically, they're going to be pressure treated in these areas, and really, they do weather pretty quickly. So as you can see here in the two photos, the lower photo is a picture of a freshly installed southern yellow, pressure treated southern yellow pine, and the upper picture is within the same area here, but this was installed about 10 years ago, and you can see that it's quite better. Material costs, or the overall estimated construction cost for the southern yellow pine softwood would be about 1.3 to 1.4. And then the other option that we've looked at.
Dan, would be worth mentioning, just, I know we had talked, just the kind of the life cycle of that pine, is it be more conducive, more prone for splintering and warping and things like that, right?
It is, yeah. So with the softwoods, they do have increased maintenance. They tend to unravel and open up within their grain quite a bit more. So there's more opportunity for splintering and rot within them versus the tropical hardwoods, or a hardwood is going to have a much denser grain material to it. And then finally, we looked at the composites. A composite has come quite a ways, even over the last 10 years from what it was. And, so they've really started to kind of come into the market quite well when you start to compare them. You're going to have a long service life. Again, we're looking at 30 to 50 years. Often, you can even get commercial warranties on these materials that are going to be in that 30-year time range. They don't have splinters or rot associated with them. Their maintenance is really low. There are some items that we would have to make sure within the specifying of the materials that are selected are addressed. Primarily being UV protection with them and traction. So making sure that they're not slippery material. And so we've got some different materials out here that are you can kind of take a look at afterwards. One of them that we've got out here introduces some, it's called a mineral composite, and the mineral composites actually have some aggregate and mineral that's actually mixed into them. So they're quite a bit rougher there to prevent that. But I think it's also worth noting that, you know, they're very frequently used in decks. And that even with the timber, if you go out there on a cool winter day, you know, in the morning, you'll get, you know, a little bit of frost on the timber out there as well that becomes very slippery, or, you know, on a wet day. And, you know, so it's not that, you know, the timber versus the composite are, you know, greatly different there. We've also heard some, you know, considerations and had some considerations on the thermal, basically attraction of the composites, and some of them will get, you know, relatively warm. The colors that we'd be looking for are really trying to make aesthetically, you know, as cohesive a look between the existing Ipe decking and the, if we were to go with the composite deck there. So it's going to be, you know, a light gray in color, which is not going to attract as much, as much solar heat gain as, you know, a dark mahogany or something of that nature. And there's also, they're working, the composite manufacturers have really been working to keep those temperatures down. So there have been some different studies that have, you know, evaluated in Florida particularly the heat gain of composites versus some of the different timbers, and they've greatly reduced that over the past few years. And I think it's also worth noting that there's a good local track record of using composites. Right within the central waterfront, the floating docks that are adjacent to this boardwalk all use a composite deck, and that's been out there for, Jordy, how long has that been there?
18 years.
Yeah, almost 20 years those composites have been out there, and really had minimal maintenance on them. We talked to the harbor master, and, you know, they haven't had, you know, any major issues with them being overly slippery as well. And then additionally, if you go over to the wildlife refuge, they've been replacing a bunch of the timber there with composites as well. You know, it is something that we're seeing quite a bit. In some of those conversations, they've talked quite a bit about, you know, the reduced maintenance that they have overall on using composites. The estimated construction cost really kind of falls in the middle between the Southern Yellow Pine and the hardwoods development. So looking at this, you know, we really kind of are trying to also keep in mind a lot of the sustainability considerations. So we're looking at, you know, recycled content, being able to reuse where we can within the composites, you know, having low maintenance and using recycled materials. The domestic softwoods are going to have low transport, so they're going to have lower carbon imprints. The concrete as well as the hardwoods are really going to have high embodied carbon because of the travel and work that's involved with those. So, you know, trying to provide resilience goals and achieve, you know, a sustainable project here for the city has been one of the other considerations. Looking at this from just a constructability standpoint, I think it's important to note that, you know, this would be a phased project. We wouldn't be looking to go in and take out the entire boardwalk all at once, because we understand that, you know, this is an important aspect to the city and the visitors, the residents, and all being able to, you know, access this waterfront. So we'd look to do it, you know, as much as we can during the off season, where there's going to be a little bit less foot traffic, as well as phasing it into at least 3 phases here, all while having the new park access way that runs kind of directly behind this boardwalk available. So, you know, we wouldn't be shutting off the entire waterfront. You'd be able to circumnavigate around it through that construction phase. And as the design is progressed, we really would be looking to develop and hone in on what that construction phasing really looked like as far as where materials are going to be stored, what time frames we would anticipate different areas being taken down and constructed, and then ultimately, how any equipment and construction would be able to access those areas. So overall, our recommendations are really to address the immediate safety concerns out there, implement some improved maintenance in the short term, and then ultimately advance the design and the permitting that is required for partial reconstruction, and then ultimately work with the City and Waterfront Trust, as well as your input for developing and selecting a preferred alternative that's going to meet the aesthetics, really kind of the cost and durability and maintenance considerations for the city. With that, I appreciate the time, and we'll turn it back over to Jordy for any questions and public comment.
All right, thanks everyone. Not too many of us here, so maybe you could just speak loudly or walk over to the microphone or ask me to hand you this microphone. But let's have a discussion. We'd love to hear what anyone thinks of any of this, or if there's other questions that we haven't answered and so forth. In the back.
Hi, I'd like to preface my public comment with that I don't really care about money or time. The boardwalk should really be made out of granite and brick.
Granite and brick, okay.
Yeah, I don't know anything about construction or anything, but granite and brick, just like the rest of Newburyport, downtown.
Yeah.
Get them back into downtown.
All right, we're recording everyone's comments, so we appreciate that. I would say that I think I've heard from most people that there's a fondness for a boardwalk in Newburyport. So I anticipate that's the direction we will probably be going, but I appreciate your comment.
Yes.
I might have missed this earlier presentation, but is the plan to put the new surface on top of the current boards or removing them? And why not?
Removing.
Yeah, the plan would be to remove the existing timber that's there, reuse where we can, and then the areas that we cannot reuse, to have that removed and replaced with new timber.
What's the reasoning behind that?
Right now, the primary reasoning for that is that to be able to get a level surface and to be able to anchor them appropriately. We've got a lot of fastener issues that are out there right now, and so just placing it right on top isn't going to resolve those fastener issues.
We'd have a real challenge of universal access and meeting state and federal codes for universal access and handicapped accessibility if you're having to meet different level surfaces and having to plane different boards and so forth. So getting rid of the old material and then putting new is a much more efficient approach.
Costly, right?
I'm sorry.
Costlier, more cost.
Well, you would save some labor by leaving something down, but you'd have much more work to try to fasten it all together and make it compliant. So, yes.
I get a sense that the fasteners played more of a role than I heard. I'm wondering if there is some answer to doing something with those fasteners to help keep it down. The other thing that comes to mind with me is that we've got plenty of boat yards and yacht clubs up and down the river, and it might be a good idea just to ask them what they found over the years to work for them for a similar scenario that we have here. I know they're trying to keep it as low a cost as they can, and it might be of some service to it. The other is the federal government has a part of Plum Island, and they've got some walkways there from the beach, and they somehow found a way to personalize it by having people personalize the boards. I'm sure that might have helped in costs for them to have it. If you've never walked those at the beach, they're kind of fascinating to see how they've done it. They might also shed some light on how we might go about doing this in and keeping the prices down.
Yeah, we have talked with Matt Hillman, the refuge manager there, about their boardwalks and their use of the composite material. Overall, they are happy with using the composites. There's always some cons. There's pros and cons to every material, but they do like it. In terms of fasteners, I think that was an interesting part of this study where Dan was talking a little bit about that previously, but it turns out there are many different types of fasteners and different types of steel. And from stainless steel to coated to other types of steel. And we think that essentially, especially with some of the repairs done over the past quarter century, the best fasteners weren't used. And it turns out that the industry has found out that pressure treated wood, which is what the stringers are made of, the chemicals in that actually will deteriorate certain types of steel. So we've had screws go in that there's no thread left, which is why the boards have started coming up. I have one of those in my office if anyone wants to come take a look. So, so when we had our contractor out there, he was putting in longer fasteners, some as long as like 17 or 18 inches, but longer fasteners. And so we're certainly going to be looking at stainless or some other, top quality fastener to make sure we get as long life as possible. Let's see.
And I would add on to that,
Yes.
that the original fasteners out there were actually like a 6-inch nail.
Right.
That extended down through.
Ben?
Jordy, I just have two questions. One, to Dylan's comment, this is Newburyport, and we think a lot about the aesthetics. So if we're choosing a different material, composite, for example, how do we expect that to look and feel in terms of the design with sections being different materials? And then the second question is, you made a brief mention on the stringers and the distance in between them. Is the plan to only potentially shorten the distance in between them on the sections that are completely rebuilt, or maybe on the yellow section where we would be rebuilding in part and then not touching the green sections, that maybe we would then phase that in a future plan? So just trying to understand, what's the, after this is done, maintenance and expectation.
Yeah, the aesthetics is clearly an important consideration. I think and right now we're getting more and more of kind of a Frankenstein monster with lots of different materials out there. The general preference is to have a look as uniform as possible. There are, to have it completely uniform, you'd have to rip out the entire boardwalk and replace it, and that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars more. And at this point, we don't feel like that's a worthwhile approach. So, but we also don't want to have sort of a checkerboard look. So when Dan, I don't know if you want to bring that picture back up, but the recommendation coming from GEI is that there's essentially going to be a middle section of the boardwalk, which is the green and the yellow, which is all gonna be épais, the existing gray material. And then the green would be staying in place as is, and the yellow would be boards harvested from elsewhere and put in. So you have a continuous line of épais. And then on either end, you have this new material. And so there's sort of one transition point between those materials. And we would be choosing a color, as I think was mentioned, that is not going to be dramatically different. You know, it's going to be in the gray tones. And so I don't think that there's going to be a significant aesthetic impact along those lines. In terms of the stringers question you were asking me about, certainly if we go with the composites, we're going to need to add more support and more stringers in those, essentially those red stretches there. But we won't need to do that in the rest of the area. And the stringers, as Dan may have noted, the stringers are doing pretty well. They're old, they're original material, but they've been protected from the weather and so forth, and they're in good shape. Part of this project, there's going to be some work done on them to fill nail holes and address shims and so forth. But for the most part, that's in good shape, and there will be no need to address that in that section until the entire boardwalk's rebuilt another 25 years from now.
That was gonna be my question. So
Yeah.
for the green and yellow sections, do we think we get 25 more years out of those, or is there some shorter lifespan for those versus the composite?
That is the projection. I mean, Dan, I know.
And you're probably looking at another, 15 to 20 years of continued service within that area.
The epay tropical hardwood, the industry says that it can last from 25 to 50 or more years. So we're seeing the range in our own materials here. And we've got enough material that, who knows, some of the materials we received may have been from one forest or a different patch, some from others. So we've seen, half or 60% of our boardwalk be in the 25% time period. But the material that's, for instance, down at the base of the embayment, southern end of the embayment, is really looking pretty good and is going to last us quite a while longer. And then with sea level rise, we're thinking that approximately 25 years is when we'll want to be raising everything up. Anyway.
Hi, my name is Bruce Allerton. I live in Newburyport, I work for Kiva Wood Lumber. We actually bid on the last redo of the boardwalk.
Okay.
And we didn't get the job, which was fine. But later, several years later, we found out that you may not have got all the pay on that job. So,
I've heard some people suggest that.
and it came from the supplier, the import.
The supplier may have given us some other type of wood.
Yeah, so don't give up on your pay. I don't think you're gonna want to composite, but, you've got parts you're thinking it's gonna last another 20 years, maybe 15, 20 years. It's already 22, 23 years now, so you may be looking at, we were told it was green, so don't give up on the epay. I think I would try to go to the epay. Composites are they'll get too hot, I think. The pine will probably have to redo that in about 5 years. And the purple hat, it could be a little toxic to pets, and you're gonna have a lot of pets walking on that boardwalk, so,
Okay.
that's
Thanks.
all.
Thanks for your input. Yeah, just in Purple Heart, I would mention, we have Purple Heart boardwalks in town now over between Cashman Park and the rail trail. That one's about 15 years old at this point. It's actually in pretty good condition. There's a couple of little spots that are starting to deteriorate. And then on the rail trail itself, the bridges, and then smaller boardwalk over at on the waterfront is Purple Heart. So those are good boardwalks, but again, you're really at the mercy of the supplier. It can take many months to get these materials. It is a tropical hardwood, which means going and clearing tropical forests. So, and it's the most expensive option. So again, no decisions have been made at this point, but I'm just trying to explain some of the thinking to date as we try to weigh these different these different pieces.
So with the truck,
Tariff issues. There could be tariff issues, which would potentially increase the cost. But that's been a moving target, and so we haven't really incorporated that into our thinking, other than the tropical hardwood is the most expensive option, and it would push it a little more expensive. Becky, please.
So I have a question about the construction phases. You had 3 different regions, but then they don't overlap with these colors. So I'm just curious, is it needs-based how you would phase it? Like based on worst condition and second worst, or how would you go about sequencing it? And then the second part of that question is, I know there's expected Viva service on the boardwalk, and how are we thinking about if modifications are required to make accessibility changes or what have you, or whatever the requirements are as part of this plan?
You want to speak to phasing?
Sure. So I'll start on the phasing. You know, as far as the phasing goes, we would start initially with, you know, the area that is in red, being able to, you know, harvest what we can out of that. And, you know, subsequent to that, you know, these 2 areas that are in green are really going to be, you know, we don't anticipate having any significant, you know, construction that really has to go on within those. And then the area that's in yellow would be kind of the last area that ultimately gets, you know, phased there, where you're taking those areas that you harvested and being able to use that.
I just have one more question. And I guess in terms of like our green areas, like I know we mentioned that they're like 20 years or so. Like, did we learn anything from the study around like what we could do to extend the life, or if there are things we should do in that area? I know it's fine now, but how do we make sure it's, you know, continues to extend that life?
As far as extending the life goes, you know, there's not a whole lot we can really do. You know, the EPA that's out there is got, you know, really, as Jordy was saying, a significant life to it still. And so, you know, the main thing is really going to be fastener replacement and, you know, really kind of just maintaining that within those 2 areas.
But there's not treatments or something like that one does to the wood. You essentially just leave it alone. Yeah. You'd also asked about accessibility. Yeah. She's referring to, I think, the little electric ferry that's planned. I don't know if people have heard about that, but there's essentially a pilot project in the works for building a solar an electric ferry that would go back and forth between here and Amesbury and Haverhill, hopefully over to Salisbury. A lot has to come together to make that happen. The boardwalk itself is not any hindrance to that project. We're trying to make the boardwalk as accessible and universally accessible as possible for any number of reasons. The accessibility issue that you're referencing is the gangways that go down from the boardwalk to the floats. And that's a whole separate question from the rehab of the boardwalk.
Yeah, I was curious. I'm not sure what the charging will go or any of that. I just would hate for us to reconstruct it and then recarve into it if we need to. If there's any infrastructure that had to go into the boardwalk.
Right. Yeah. All the electrical infrastructure was recently upgraded as part of the bulkhead and the park project, and so all those conduits run underneath the decking, and so none of that would be an issue in terms of we'll have to work with Viva and Jeff Matheson, the electrician, about whether there's increased power needs or something like that. But we boosted some of the power along there to get in bigger boats, so I don't anticipate there's going to be significant problems there.
I'm seeing a lot of like pros and cons on cost and longevity, and
Yeah.
I think what would help me think about the value that we get is if you could provide some numbers around, I see the estimated cost per material, but if you could create a table for us that divided that cost out by the expected longevity of each of those materials plus the expected annual total annual cost for however long we had each one of those. I think that would give us a real baseline for comparing these options with some clearer numbers around them. So if that's something you could make, I would enjoy it very much. I also had one sort of follow-up question about the actual lifespan of the eBay, and I know now we've gotten some other information that maybe it is or maybe it isn't, but I've heard 25 to 50 years, but it seems like we got 25. So is it really reasonable to expect any more than 25 out of the new? So that's
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a very significant difference if you go down and look closely at the stretch in green, the southern part of the existing boardwalk, which is the connection point for the new shared use pathway. All those boards, they're not flaking, they're not cupping, they're not rotting. Those boards are in good shape. Now again, there's a stretch of them, perhaps they came from one specific batch. It's a little unclear, like, why is this stretch good and then another stretch is bad? But it is clear that for whatever reason, there is a broad range here in terms of how this material functions. And we have some of it that's at the end of its service life and some that's in the middle of its service life. We have seen IPE or I'd say we is very broad, the world has seen IPE last many decades in optimal conditions. So GEI, the recommendations we're getting is that we're reasonably assured that if we keep hold on to that material, we are going to get a lot more use out of it. And I tend to think that ripping up all that pretty good material and replacing it would be a pretty big waste.
Oh,
So.
yeah, I'm not suggesting that we rip out the parts that are okay. I
Right.
just meant for the future sections, how, in creating the table I'm asking for, how we choose the lifespan of it, it doesn't necessarily seem to me like we could say that based on our past experience with this material. That was my question.
Right, yeah, 50 seems to be pushing it.
That's
So Dan is saying actually like 15 or 20 is more years is a better expectation, and then we might be getting into the board by board replacement situation that we've been in more recently. Yes.
Didn't hear anything about what, if there's a difference in these choices in terms of how long it takes to construct, and just generally, do you have an idea of how long it's going to take to construct?
Ken, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so as far as the overall construction goes, it probably, by the time that you phase it out in those phases, each of those phases is probably going to take, in the range, I would say, 3 to 5 months there for each of the phases. So it's about a year worth of effort to do the overall repair. There, because you're going to have to take out those boards, do the repair of this, any repair on the stringers, if we've got to build anything additional there, and then install the new deck on it. So maybe quicker, but that's generally what I would.
Is that 12 months continuous or 12 months?
Yeah. No, they'll work basically through the winter time period there, as much as they can.
And I would like to underline that we do, compared to 25 years ago when we were taking out the whole boardwalk and replacing it, we do now have the shared use pathway which runs along there and will allow, even if we have a section of the boardwalk which is closed off, people will still be able to get back and forth, which I think is a huge positive for sort of dealing with that construction time.
I put in one thing to reinforce, which is to help bring us to this good. And remembering when this boardwalk was done 25 years ago, and remembering discussions before that, there were discussions in City Hall about various options, everything from a composite to wood. Somebody wanted metal, but there were problems with traction and everything.
Yeah.
And we got the wood we got. Comparing how the wood looked before the last one was done, in the late 90s, early 2000s versus now, I think this batch of wood is a lot more inferior to what we had back then. So it kind of reinforces what I suspect, which is we need a good batch of wood. That being said, the e-pay sounds like it's a pretty good deal, provided we get the good wood. I would strongly suggest, and you probably know this, to compare other boardwalks, not just here, but in New Jersey, which I spend a lot of time in and I go to regularly, and those towns have the replacement and maintenance regimen for that. They use wood, some use composite, but either way, they have a plan. My concern is on the partial replacement. Cost aside, this is like the roofer telling you that your roof is 75% needs replacement, and you say, okay, do that, I'll get back to you with 25%. I think, money aside, we should consider doing all of it, especially because this isn't something that comes under the tax cap, because you're looking at two sources of income of the money. One is a grant, ideally a state grant, although that's uncertain because of the fiscal situation. The other is CPA, which over the years, the last 20 years plus, has been used basically for larger city projects. Everything from rewiring this building after a fire in the 80s to putting an artificial turf at the stadium of the high school. So it's not to say that if we actually look forward and say we may want to spend a few extra $100,000 to put in a whole new boardwalk. Otherwise, we have to commit to not saying in 25 years we'll do the rest. We need to make sure we maintain it over those years, because you will get to a situation Councilor Harmon is talking about where these boards look great. These boards will be replaced in 25 years. They look pretty crappy. So I'm just kind of hoping that not just aesthetically, but for durability purposes and being prudent on getting the right wood and making sure while we have a chance, we do the whole project. Now, that may not be popular because of the money, but if we're concerned if CPA funds are possible, or if the state money, sure. If it comes off the city revenues aside from those, sure, that can be an economic issue. Maybe we'll say we have to put off something in 25 years, but I'd just like to make sure we get it right this time compared to what we have now versus what we had in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Thank you. I do just want to put one point out there on the eBay, and that is that right now, eBay is a bit more difficult to get because it's been put on an endangered species list for the U.S. import. So we can still get it, but it is, it's basically the U.S. that's saying that at this moment, so.
Composite would be much more consistent. We get the same, you wouldn't have to worry about inferior wood or partial patches, correct?
That's true.
I'll also say,
To answer his question, all the IPA that's coming into the country has to be accompanied with a site certificate and documentation. So therefore, we know what when we get it.
Correct.
Whereas back 20 years ago, we might not have had that, you know. And as far as being endangered, it's on the appendix 2. It's not appendix 3 yet, and so it's still readily available. You can get it. I deal with like the largest importer in the country on eBay.
there was chain of custody documents back when the material came in 2001. So I've heard the rumors, but there's actually, I would note that we don't have any proof that the material is different.
Chain
And so I
of
just,
custody would be a little bit different than the site. The site is
Yeah.
from the United Nations, whereas the chain of custody is probably an FSC.
yeah,
Which can
no,
be pretty
you're right
much
about that. But then
fudged.
it was very, tropical hardwoods can be very difficult to secure, and we can put in our specs, CITES and certain other things that they've been proven possible to get. The one other thing that Dennis was talking about, New Jersey, I actually was just talking with the DPW director in Belmar, New Jersey, where after Hurricane Sandy ripped out their boardwalks, they did a huge replacement, and they went with a composite. And I've heard pros and cons about the New Jersey composite boardwalks, so I called him up and asked him what his take on it was. So he talked about some of those cons, but he was very positive overall about the use of the composites. But Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet?
Yeah, just a question on the overall process for coming to a decision, and how is that gonna happen?
Yeah, so this feasibility study, planning study is supposed to be wrapped up by approximately the end of the calendar year. We're still gonna be gathering information about specific brands and specific materials and trying to weigh these things. Ultimately, I think it's probably gonna be the mayor's call for what sort of recommendation we take, but we are gonna lean on our consultants' professional recommendations and look at achieve consensus with the Newburyport Waterfront Trust, as well as our own TPS, and talking to the city council and everybody else. It doesn't mean necessarily that 100% of everyone's going to agree, because there's a lot of different choices, but hopefully we'll get to a general consensus, and then next year be able to advance this project. Yes, sir.
That 1.7 million for the hardwood, now, is that replacing the whole boardwalk, or just patching in where it needs it, reuse it?
That's the partial approach where you maintain 40% of the existing boardwalk and replace 60%.
Now, if they go to composite, which I'm a wood guy, boardwalk should be wood, but if they went composite, is that basically making a commitment to do the whole thing in composite, in phases or whatever? I mean, you don't want to have part of it composite and the other part wood. I mean,
That is actually what's being recommended. I don't know if you want to speak to that some more.
Yeah, at the moment, you know, if whatever material is selected, the plan would be that the areas that are in green and yellow would maintain the existing timber that's out there, and the areas that are in red would be the new material that is ultimately selected. So if it was composite, there would be a change. If there's timber, there's going to be a change.
so what would happen to those yellow and green areas in 10 years? They would go to composite to match the other.
That would likely be the scenario, is that when those are ready for updating, that they would get, you know,
Now,
updated in
If they
whatever.
go into
material
wood,
is.
which I've been here for quite a few years, if they put a sealant on this once a year, would that help? Because some areas get more sun than others, so that's probably where a lot wear is, because it's getting more sun, beating on it, you know? I mean, if it was a yearly thing that they sealed it, you know, in the end of the season or whatever, or the beginning of the season, you know, a sealant put on there before the wood's put down to seal it, you know, all sides, you know, not just what shows. And that might extend the life of this stuff.
I don't think tropical hardwoods typically take sealing.
Okay, I don't know.
Yeah, and we actually experimented with that a little bit on the Purple Heart Boardwalk over at Cashman Park and the rail trail. And it's also expensive to do that every year, so that adds
Oh, whatever, every 3
significantly to
years,
the.
5, whatever, you know,
maintenance.
just keep it, because it is dried out in areas that get the sun, you can see a lot of cupping where the sun hits a lot, you know, especially in that, whatever you call a horseshoe or whatever, in that area, the sun, because I get out and sit, and that's where I sit when it's cold.
Yeah,
The sun,
one of the suggestions from contractors and one of the timber suppliers we were talking to was the thicker boards that we have out there, the 3-inch boards. There's actually, there's a difference in the moisture content in the middle of the board versus the surface area, and that's potentially adding to some of the flexing that we've seen, as opposed to some of these 2-inch or 5-quarter boards. So that's an interesting piece of the
if you
puzzle.
go to a thinner wood, you're gonna have to build the substructure up to
That's correct. Yeah, or shim those.
trim that way out.
Is there anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet?
I'll just give you a little bit of information. I'm
ago, we would composite on the porch in front of the clubhouse. And we are very much exposed to the eaves. So we get clobbered in these storms. We've had bulkheads pulled out, and the composite has maintained itself. And it looks just as good now as it did when it was put down, probably 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good to know. Thank you. Stain? No, that's just it just weathers to gray. You know, it starts out a brown color and weathers. I think, like I mentioned, we tried when the Purple Heart was first put down. The Purple Heart, when it's cut, is actually very purple. It's strikingly purple, crazily purple. And some people, when it was first put in, were saying, "This is fantastic! What an amazing board!" And so someone said, you know, we could put this UV, coating on it, try to retain it. And so we did that, and then it faded anyway. So anyway. In the back.
Hi, I'm gonna stand for mine. This is a shape plug. I abandoned my patent for my shape, so I would suggest the brick be made out of this shape, just for progress.
The brick, okay.
Yeah, for my granite brick plug.
Granite brick boardwalk. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
Brick wall. Got it. All right, and does anyone else have anything up, Jim? Oh, okay. Anyone else at the moment now? So we're going to continue to get information. We're going to update there's an existing alternatives analysis written report that GI has done, which is on the city's website. It's in draft form. We're going to take comments into consideration, and GEI will update that, and we'll get that posted. And I'm pretty easy to find here in City Hall. You all can keep emailing me and asking me questions as we go forward. And we're gonna go back to the City Council in the coming couple of months and have another public discussion about this. And hopefully, almost certainly, we'll be going to the CPA and be in front of them. So there'll be several other public forums in which this will come up. And we'll talk about how we go forward. I guess I want to emphasize again, there is no one perfect material, and there's different opinions on which to use. We've tried to go into this process with a pretty open mind in terms of what's the best approach, and I didn't know which direction the consultant was gonna be coming out the other end with. So. We'll see where this takes us in the coming months, but I'm certainly hoping we'll be able to advance this project next year. Last question?
Yeah, will all these options be brought to the vote, or is it just something you guys would
Yeah, I don't. There's not going to be a separate sort of public vote on the material.
Waterfront, there's 3 options. Voted on them,
Yeah, keep talking to us, keep talking to your city councilors, and we'll figure it all out. Thanks everyone for coming.